Okay. I think I'll just start with the technical introduction here. Is everybody hearing me all right? Okay, greetings. Everybody, thank you so much for sticking to this and taking a whole month to sort through all of your other adaptations and keeping your interest high on this really important theme of student success and the public good. Here's the plan. I'll just be the technical introducer, and then I'm going to introduce our director, who will introduce our speakers. But here's the plan. It's for roughly 15 minutes of opening comments from each of our panelists, followed by interaction with the speakers and with each other. And to control for background noise in a bit, I'm going to mute everyone but the panelists in the first segment. While I do that, while you listen to them, please use the chat box to post your responses and your questions to the panelists. I'll do my best to monitor that chat, and it'll help me if that chat box fills and flows really quickly for you to put in all caps the word question so that my eye catches those as I monitor them. All three of our speakers have been given, are going to be given their opening remarks. We'll open for discussion, and then I will unmute everybody to enable interaction. But if the voice traffic becomes an issue during that phase, I will let the questions in chat guide the succession of our speech. So now I'll introduce David Proctor, the Director of the Center for Engagement and Community Development. Hit it, Dave.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for sticking with us in this virtual version of our annual Engagement Symposium. The Engagement Symposium has historically been organized by both our Center for Engagement and Community Development and also our Institute for Civic Discourse and Democracy. And I think that the keynotes that you're going to hear here today will reflect both issues of engagement and issues of political dialogue and political participation. I want to say just very briefly, our Institute for Civic Discourse and Democracy was founded in 2004. And the goals of that institute, when we created it, are very consistent with some of the ideas that you're going to hear today. We wanted we created this in 2004, and ironically enough, we created it, one of the primary reasons was because we thought the level of political discourse had gotten so bad back in 2004 that something had to be done. And so you can tell that we've made a lot of impact in the intervening years. But what we wanted to try and do is that with ICDD we wanted to try and help give citizens more political voice. We wanted to try and help communities generate more reasoned decisions about the challenging issues that their locales faced. And we wanted to help bring a greater diversity of voices into the political dialogue. And so I'm really happy with our keynotes today, and I know that they're going to speak about some of these particular issues. I also, before I introduce the keynotes, I also want to thank Donna Shink-Hamlin. Donna is a project manager for CECD and ICDD, and she is the primary reason that we are here today. She has done, I just think, an amazing job of communicating with all of our registrants, communicating with all our speakers. And Donna, I'm just so pleased with what you have come up with here today. Our idea with the Engagement Symposium, because we wanted it to be both faculty, staff, as well as student-oriented, is the idea was that we were going to have both faculty as keynote speakers, but we also wanted to have students as keynote speakers. And so today we're really blessed to have a faculty representative and two student representatives that are going to provide remarks. I'm happy to introduce Dr. Nancy Thomas, who directs the Institute for Democracy and Higher Education at Tufts University Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life. This is an applied research center that studies higher education's role in American democracy and supports colleges and universities and their student political learning and participation. That institute has a signature initiative, and it's called the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement, of which Kansas State University is, we have contributed data to that study. It examines student voting rates, patterns, and conditions, and it really sort of highlights and tracks the level of student participation, and we've been really happy to see our particular level of participation in that report. Dr. Thomas holds a doctorate from Harvard Graduate School of Education and a law degree from Case Western Research University School of Law. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the two students as I'm not going to be able to stay the full time. So we are also very pleased to have Hayley Spellman as our undergraduate student keynoter. Hayley is a fifth-year senior at Kansas State University, majoring in both political science and communication studies. She has served on the Student Governing Association, but perhaps most importantly, she has been significantly involved in student voter registration. In the fall of 2018, she organized a campus-wide initiative for national voter. She created the National Voter Registration Day at Kansas State University. In the fall of 2019, Hayley founded a new student organization called Wildcats Vote, where she serves as the president. Their focus is on building relationships throughout K-State and the local community to promote increased voter registration and turnout. We also have as a student keynote speaker, Ron Orchard, who is in his second year in the College of Veterinary Medicine. And he is also pursuing a master's degree in a master's of public health at K-State. Ron is a licensed veterinary technician. He has come to Kansas with extensive experience with Seattle Humane and also served as the shelter medicine manager for the Oregon Humane Society. Ron's experience really was key to his selection and his work in setting up the shelter medicine program at the K-State School of Veterinary Medicine. Ron volunteers his time to community organizations, including This Is How We Roll, a student chapter at the KSU College of Veterinary Medicine that provides biology lessons for low-income children. And with that, Dr. Thomas, I would turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm disappointed that I'm not there in person. I was really looking forward to exploring your neighborhood and your coffee shops. So I guess I'm going to have to take a rain check, but I appreciate this socially safe distance conference. I really appreciate it. And I'm also thrilled to be back with Hayley again. I met Hayley a couple of years ago at a conference, and she was mighty impressive. As I recall, I said, "How soon are you graduating and how soon can I hire you?" Still waiting for an answer. Anyway, so today I want to start out with something. I want to hear from you all, actually. And I do this when I talk at conferences and people are physically in the room, I ask them this question, and I'm going to ask you, but you're going to have to put your answer in the chat box. So push your chat button right now. I am wondering if you could give me an adjective or a very short phrase to describe how you're feeling right now. But it's not feeling about everything. It's really feeling about the state of civic health in this country, the state of politics, political affairs, and particularly the context right now, which is at a time of COVID-19. So if you could just give me some adjectives, I can give you an example. I'm a little perplexed and maybe even a little jittery. So take a minute to enter those. Yeah, I'm seeing some repeaters. Seen these before, pre-COVID. Worried. So here's what I'm seeing. Keep adding, and if you've got more than one, feel free to add that too. I'm seeing nervous and disappointed. Overwhelmed is a theme here. Several people are overwhelmed. Befuddled, I think, is a great word to describe how a lot of us are feeling right now, but I link it to roller coaster, you know? It's like this. And it is confusing. There's somebody here who wrote down confused. I love this one, simultaneously overwhelmed and energized. And I think I see a lot of evidence out there as I look at the landscape of public life right now. You read all these heroic stories, these wonderful stories about people engaging in their communities in new ways and being very creative about supporting each other. And at the same time, we just have to stay apart. It's very hard time for all the work we do. Emotional, and here it is again, that roller coaster every day. Thank you for sharing those. Sorry you're feeling this way. I think we all are. So I probably am not going to alleviate many of these concerns. I'm not sure I can, but I'm going to give you my 2 cents worth and see what you think about it. So just to sort of catch you up on what we do, we're the ones who give you your NSOLVE reports. But in addition to that, we also study campus climates for political learning and engagement. And we do that because we think that maybe we're coming at voting a little bit wrong. And we also think that voting is a very social act. It is an act of collective civic engagement, and there are barriers to it. And so you need to help each other vote. You need to work together to vote. And in fact, our research has suggested that things like social cohesion and connectivity make a big difference. The more connected you are to each other, the better it will be for your campus climate for political learning and engagement. And another thing that we found is that it's a matter of how we talk politics. A lot of people don't. They don't want to. It's ugly. It's irritating. It's not even the list of adjectives I see here. I just don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And it goes back to David Proctor's point about we can't talk to each other across polarization. Well, the reality is if we cannot talk to each other about political issues and public affairs, then we are not going to be able to work together. And again, voting is a social act, and we need to be able to work together on these things. So I guess I would say we do study voting, but what we really are studying are conditions for voting, political discourse, the best practices, how do faculty members look at these things in the classroom. And then the last thing we look at, and it is probably what I should always mention first, and that is political inequality. It matters what your voting rates are. It matters a whole lot more who votes. And we do not have a representational democracy. We have a democracy where a lot of people are left behind. And in fact, many are left behind by design of the system. And so in addition to focusing on the nuts and bolts of voting or registering to vote, it's really important to pay attention to who votes and how you're reaching out to them. I think Hayley's going to talk a lot about coalitions, which we think are tremendously important. So just to sort of give you a landscape on voting, and I'm not going to dive into this a lot, but when we started our study, we gave you data for 2012, we gave you data for 2014. In 2014, 13% of undergraduates in our study voted. I'm just gonna let that sit there. That's barely more than 1 in 10. And that's an enormous problem. Now, 2014 was a low rate for all Americans, but it was crazy low for undergraduates. And so when we gave that data out to campuses, and we have over 10 million students in our database, so it's not an it's more than half of the college students, a pretty good representative sample. And when we gave those numbers out to campuses, it was a huge wake-up call. Now, I'm not going to take total credit for what happened in 2018. I'd like to. I will tell you, I would really like to, but I won't. But voting rates doubled. And for both graduates and undergraduate students, it was 40%. The increase from the last midterm was 21 percentage points, whereas in public life, Americans increased their voting rate by 13 percentage points. So something was going on college campuses that was really exciting and led us to believe that 2020 is a no-brainer. And in fact, I've been running around saying, don't pay attention to 2020. We're going to have a crisis in 2022. So, and I do think that. I really felt that colleges were on their game. Institutional leaders were stepping up. Students were mobilizing very effectively, and there were a lot of good things happening out of faculty ranks. COVID has sort of maybe thrown a little monkey wrench in all of that. I don't know, but it's a real problem. And it's a problem. Why? Because going back to what I said about social cohesion, we don't have it because we are physically apart. It's not even clear that we're going to be back together again in the fall. And when we do get back together in the fall, a lot of people will have suffered some serious trauma. And 25% of this, all your seniors will have graduated or thereabouts. You'll have a whole new group. So the intentionality behind building social cohesion so that you can talk politics, so that you can engage in this collective act is going to be a lot harder than I anticipated it would be. So I'm only going to give you a couple of tips on what to do, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues here. But I do think that a lot is resting on faculty. We know students are going to be attached to their faculty in the fall. We know they're connected right now. Faculty have to be willing to share this space and talk politics. There's not one discipline out there that doesn't have a public relevance. Look at what Ron does. I mean, he's doing all this amazing civic work using his veterinary background. So it is absolutely paramount that every discipline pays attention to their public relevance. Activism is critical, and engagement, community organizing, community engagement. There is even some evidence to suggest that activists vote at double the rate of their non-active peers. So when Ron talks about his civic engagement work, it's very important. It's all connected. It's all part of the same fabric. And then I think we need to get clubs going. People need to start talking. Hayley's got her coalition, but there are clubs, there are disciplinary clubs. Get that chemistry club going, get that engineering society up and running. Make sure the faculty are involved and talk about those public issues. And then finally, and I'm not going to go into this because it's just such a big can of worms, fight for convenience in voting. Fight to remove barriers to voting. You want to be activists? That's an important issue. There are barriers right now. It is not right that people in Wisconsin had to choose between sitting in line and catching this possibly deathly disease and exercising their civil right. And if we don't work that out now, we got a problem. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hayley.
Thanks, Dr. Thomas. I don't know about anyone else, but I could listen to Dr. Thomas talk forever and ever and ever. Her and I actually met last May, and that was the first time that I was able to listen to her speak in person, give a presentation, and I've always been so impressed with all of her work. So thank you so much for you and for everything that IDHE has been doing over the past couple of years. I know at K-State it's been tremendously helpful, and I can only imagine that echoed all over colleges across the country. So thank you. I did want to kind of follow up with something that Dr. Thomas had said earlier, specifically around the political inequality. For those that have been living in Kansas for the past at least 3 years or so now, you'll remember that we had a requirement for registering to vote, and it was where you had to submit a proof of citizenship requirement. So for me, when I registered to vote for the first time in 2015, 2016, going to vote, I had to submit a birth certificate, or you could submit a passport or a document of the kind. And in just the 4 years, that law was implemented in 2013, and in just the 4 years that it was enacted in the state of Kansas, it barred over 30,000 Kansans from registering to vote. So when we think about that political inequality, we think young people especially, and people in minority communities. And I know for many at K-State falling into both of those categories, that's the 1 in 10 that don't vote in 1 in 10 that do vote in 2014. 2014, we had such a small portion of our population that actually went to the polls and cast their ballot. But knowing from K-State's NSOLV report, about 3/4 of students are registered to vote. So it's really difficult trying to think, how do we take all of the people that are registered to vote and encourage them and motivate them to go to the polls and cast their ballot. So in 2018, that was when the law had actually been reversed. There were a lot of online platforms that were emerging at the time, specifically with the tool ksvotes.org. And that was where it would take the voter registration form and it made it completely online. So it was very simple, it was mobile friendly, so people could just go to ksvotes.org on their phone. But we saw a lot of opportunities going into the 2018 election to, of course, encourage students to register to vote using that platform. But one of the other helpful tools that it used was you could check your voter registration, you could request an advance ballot by mail, and we saw those as opportunities to kind of take that next step and motivate students to go from being registered to being voters and active voters and habitual voters. Because especially if you're going to vote at a very young age, it's going to be increasingly likely that you will vote when you become 50 or 60 or throughout your entire life. You're more likely to go and cast your ballot. One thing that I did want to talk about was the importance of building cross-campus and cross-community collaborations and coalitions. Kind of with what Dr. Proctor and Dr. Thomas said, both in the introductions and in her presentation, the importance of knowing what tools you have is something that I have focused on over the past couple of years, especially. Going into the 2018 election, we didn't really have a coalition of any sorts. That was actually the first year that the unofficial coalition emerged. We called ourselves K-State Votes, and K-State Votes comprised of nearly 10 entities across the entire campus. So every corner of the campus was included in this coalition. On campus, we had housing and dining services. We had departments such as communication studies. I at the time was serving as a leader in the Student Governing Association, and ICDD, CECD, the list goes on. But it also includes community members as well. So we had gotten the League of Women Voters involved in this project. And we actually had one of our representatives from the League come and train our voter registration volunteers ahead of that National Voter Registration Day efforts. All of that work really demonstrated that coalitions do work, but that they're easier said than done. So when, of course, COVID now is rocking our campus, we're all at home. This is like the wall to my apartment. You might hear my cat running around soon. It's not normal for us. And when we go into the summer and especially into the fall election, one thing that it's important for us to remember is, regardless of where we're at, it's still important to maintain those coalitions, to maintain all of those connections that we've been working so hard over the past couple years. Whether it's a Zoom meetup like we're meeting right now, or whether it's in person, knock on wood, in the fall, those community and cross-campus coalitions are very important to making sure that our students actually go out and vote. And that's something that I've been working on over the last 2 academic years now. And it's something that I'd hope that I will leave with you after we walk away from this Zoom call. The other thing I wanted to talk about was kind of transitioning into this new world of organizing. So I am the president, I'm actually the outgoing president of Wildcats Vote. Our elections are actually next Monday, so my term is almost up. But one of the things that Wildcats Vote has been working on over the past couple years, or past couple weeks, is Kansas Voter Registration Day. So put simply, we created our own celebration in the spring. It's very similar to the structure of National Voter Registration Day, which occurs in September. So it's the second Tuesday of every, or fourth Tuesday of every September. Kansas Voter Registration Day would be celebrated on the second Tuesday of every April. And it was that reminder that we would have a campus-wide voter registration drive, but it was an important reminder for us to kind of keep that conversation going. And one of the things that I've noticed is that the conversation around voter turnout and engagement is something that only happens during the fall semester and something that only happens on even years. So in Kansas, we're fortunate enough to have an election every single year. So in 2019, we had an election. 2017, we had an election. Now those are for local elections, and typically they have a very small turnout, but it's still an important reminder that every single fall, we're going to be going to the polls, or at least hoping to go to the polls. And for Kansas Voter Registration Day, our original plans were to have a campus-wide voter registration drive. So we had outlined and had about 10 different campus locations set up. We were getting ready to go out and ask for volunteers. And that's when COVID kind of turned everything upside down. So this new world of organizing is very unique in the sense of there's so many different opportunities that we can kind of navigate in this challenging time. So I have sent a record number of emails in the past couple weeks. I've had different news media outlets that I've tried to be in contact with. We've reached out to student organizations, and one thing that really fell flat was our emails didn't get any response. So we were very active on social media on KVRD, or Kansas Voter Registration Day, but all of the emails that we had sent out trying to build connections with student organization leaders, trying to create those relationships with campus administration, the local media outlets, it kind of fell flat. So especially regardless of what the event is, and especially if we're going to be online in the fall too, is to kind of take what is working and throw it out the window. Because everything that worked when we were on campus and having those face-to-face conversations, those face-to-face networking opportunities is not there anymore. So creativity is another big thing that we need to focus on. The last thing that I'm going to leave with you is just recognizing the power of youth voting rates, or just the youth vote in general. If every single young person in this country voted, we would own the election. Put simply, there are so many young people that are gradually getting interested in becoming a part of this process, but there's so many more that still don't. And that was recognized in 2014 and 2012, where our campus voting rates were pretty low. And especially compared to 2016 and 2018 being a historical year, that's a growing trend on where we're seeing more people become motivated and becoming activists in themselves to be a part of something larger than themselves. And kind of the last thing that Nancy had said was just making sure to advocate for free and open and accessible elections. So the thing with ksvotes.org, for example, that tool is very simple to use. You can get registered to vote in 3 minutes. Trying to get someone out to the polls is a little different, but the helpful part with that online platform is that you can request an advance ballot by mail. And in using that tool, that takes less than 3 minutes too. You just have to get them to return that advance ballot. Going back to the SAFE Act, the Secure and Fair Elections Act, that required the proof of citizenship document, that barred so many young people from registering to vote and being a part of the democratic process. But I know moving forward with that law no longer being in place, with kind of the trend of speakers going up as well, it's something to look forward to, and it's a challenge that we have to look forward to for this fall. So I think I went a little longer than expected, but I will go ahead and transition into Ron.
Awesome. Thank you, Hayley. I have a statement prepared, so I'm going to read that statement. I'm very honored to be asked to participate in this year's engagement symposium. However, as we crept into our current crisis, I became very hesitant to participate in any activities other than those deemed essential and urgent. This motivated my peers and I to use this event as an opportunity to call our communities to action. Colleagues who I'm sharing this digital stage with have both discussed the importance of voting and have both done fantastic work to encourage participation in this activity. I hope to offer additional support and context for their issue of emphasis while maintaining focus on the present. A quick aside, this present will likely require evolutions to our democracy that include measures such as universal mail ballots, which we can talk more, and I'm sure Nancy can tell you a lot about those too. But voting is an endeavor of power. And for an individual, this is empowering, but as a community, it's the strength of nations. And we see now the power we have as communities. We have the potential to push back a pandemic and force a virus at bay. These strides, albeit still continuing, are made due to sacrifice and not selfishness. While this pandemic is driven by a very contagious pathogen, the data are also true, that many of us would neither develop clinical disease or most of us would recover successfully if we became infected. So why are we doing all this self-quarantine? Medical infrastructure and healthcare bandwidth aside, this is because it's not about us as an individual or just our families, but it's about our community in total, and specifically those most vulnerable in our community, the immune compromised and elderly, for example. I encourage and implore all of us to maintain a sense of sacrifice and duty when it comes time to vote. This is an activity that should be taken and held in this same regard. When making these decisions for our community, remember those who are the most vulnerable and act for them, even if that means sacrifice. We've seen we can all do it. This conversation has to be framed by saying those who are waiting for the next election to take action are in a privileged position and should seek opportunities to serve now, during this urgent time. There are ways currently to get involved immediately. Mutual aid networks are springing up all across the country. Our neighbors are facing severe housing insecurity issues. The true realization of essential workers have left many marginalized or disrespected professions on the front lines of this virus, with a discrepancy between exposure to unsafe conditions and compensation, both in income and health benefits. These needs are being addressed by those affected, and their campaigns are being led by champions from among their ranks. We should listen to their solutions for their problems and support them in the ways they request. They are the masters of their own challenges. We can look locally to organizations like the Manhattan Alliance for Peace and Justice or Renters Together for excellent examples. Obviously, everyone wants to be done with this pandemic and the challenges it has brought. As life-shattering as this time has been, we should all acknowledge that for many, they would not choose to return to our old normal. It was a time of minimal support and minimal compassion. This left cracks in our society that were papered over for them to be inconspicuous to those not currently facing this violence. COVID-19 blew this paper off to show us all our frailties as a nation. Now that we can all see, we can start to unpack how these weaknesses drove us into the current crisis that we find ourselves. It is time for us to build a new normal that includes everyone, not just those with the papered over view. A time where decisions are made for communities. We must move out of our era of contempt for mutual obligations into a time where the new normal is one where we all embrace a collaborative responsibility to look after our community. And thank you.